Section 13 of L'Assommoir. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Martin Geeson. L'Assommoir by Emile Zola, translated by Ernest A. Visitelli. Fifth part of Chapter 3. My Boots was still eating. He had asked for another loaf. He finished what there was of the cheese, and as there was some cream left, he had the salad bowl passed to him, in which he sliced some large pieces of bread as though for a soup. "The gentleman is really remarkable," said Monsieur Madinier, again giving way to his admiration. Then the men rose to get their pipes. They stood for a moment behind My Boots, patting him on the back and asking him if he was feeling better. Bibi the smoker lifted him up in his chair, but tonnerre de Dieu, the animal had doubled in weight. Coupeau joked that My Boots was only getting started, that now he was going to settle down and really eat for the rest of the night. The waiters were startled and quickly vanished from sight. Boche, who had gone downstairs for a moment, came up to report the proprietor's reaction. He was standing behind his bar, pale as death. His wife, dreadfully upset, was wondering if any bakeries were still open. Even the cat seemed deep in despair. This was as funny as could be, really worth the price of the dinner. It was impossible to have a proper dinner party without My Boots, the bottomless pit. The other men eyed him with a brooding jealousy as they puffed on their pipes. Indeed, to be able to eat so much, you had to be very solidly built. "I wouldn't care to be obliged to support you," said Madame Gaudron. "Ah, no, you may take my word for that." "I say, little mother, no jokes," replied My Boots, casting a side glance at his neighbour's rotund figure. "You've swallowed more than I have." The others applauded, shouting, "Bravo!" It was well answered. It was now pitch dark outside. 3 gas jets were flaring in the room, diffusing dim rays in the midst of the tobacco smoke. The waiters, after serving the coffee and the brandy, had removed the last piles of dirty plates. Down below, beneath the 3 acacias, dancing had commenced, a cornet à piston and 2 fiddles playing very loud, and mingling in the warm night air with the rather hoarse laughter of women. "We must have a punch," cried My Boots. 2 quarts of brandy, lots of lemon, and a little sugar." But Coupeau, seeing the anxious look on Gervaise's face in front of him, got up from the table, declaring that there should be no more drink. They had emptied 25 quarts, 1.5 quarts to each person, counting the children as grown-up people. That was already too much. They had had a feed together in good fellowship and without ceremony, because they esteemed each other and wished to celebrate the event of the day among themselves. Everything had been very nice. They'd had lots of fun. It wouldn't do to get cockeyed drunk now, out of respect to the ladies. That was all he had to say. They had come together to toast a marriage, and they had done so. Coupeau delivered the little speech with convincing sincerity, and punctuated each phrase by placing his hand on his heart. He won wholehearted approval from Lorilleux and Monsieur Madinier, but the other 4 men, especially My Boots, were already well lit and sneered. They declared in hoarse, drunken voices that they were thirsty and wanted drinks. "Those who are thirsty, and those who aren't thirsty," remarked My Boots. "Therefore we'll order the punch. No one need take offence. The aristocrats can drink sugar and water." And as the zinc worker commenced another sermon, the other, who had risen on his legs, gave himself a slap, exclaiming, "Come, let's have no more of that, my boy. Waiter, 2 quarts of your aged stuff." So Coupeau said, very well, only they would settle for the dinner at once. It would prevent any disputes. The well-behaved people did not want to pay for the drunkards. And it just happened that My Boots, after searching in his pockets for a long time, could produce only 3 francs and 7 sous. Well, why had they made him wait all that time on the Route de Saint-Denis? He could not let himself be drowned, and so he'd broken into his 5-franc piece. It was the fault of the others, that was all. He ended by giving the 3 francs, keeping the 7 sous for the morrow's tobacco. Coupeau, who was furious, would have knocked him over, had not Gervaise, greatly frightened, pulled him by his coat and begged him to keep cool. He decided to borrow the 2 francs off Lorilleux, who, after refusing them, lent them on the sly, for his wife would never have consented to his doing so. Monsieur Madinier went round with a plate. The spinster and the ladies who were alone, Madame Lerat, Madame Fauconnier, Mademoiselle Remanjou, discreetly placed their 5-franc pieces in it first. Then the gentlemen went to the other end of the room and made up the accounts. They were 15. It amounted therefore to 75 francs. When the 75 francs were in the plate, each man added 5 sous for the waiters. It took a quarter of an hour of laborious calculations before everything was settled to the general satisfaction. But when Monsieur Madinier, who wished to deal direct with the landlord, had got him to step up, the whole party became lost in astonishment on hearing him say with a smile that there was still something due to him. There were some extras. And as the word extras was greeted with angry exclamations, he entered into details. 25 quarts of wine instead of 20, the number agreed upon beforehand, the frosted eggs which he had added as the dessert was rather scanty, finally a quarter of a bottle of rum served with the coffee, in case anyone preferred rum. Then a formidable quarrel ensued. Coupeau, who was appealed to, protested against everything. He had never mentioned 20 quarts. As for the frosted eggs, they were included in the dessert, so much the worse for the landlord if he chose to add them without being asked to do so. There remained the rum, a mere nothing, just a mode of increasing the bill by putting on the table spirits that no one thought anything about. It was on the tray with the coffee, he cried, therefore it goes with the coffee. Go to the deuce, take your money, and never again will we step foot in your den. It's 6 francs more, repeated the landlord. Pay me my 6 francs. And with all that, I haven't counted the 4 loaves that gentleman ate. The whole party, pressing forward, surrounded him with furious gestures and a yelping of voices choking with rage. The women especially threw aside all reserve and refused to add another centime. This was some wedding dinner. Mademoiselle Remanjou vowed she would never again attend such a party. Madame Fauconnier declared that she'd had a very disappointing meal. At home she could have had a finger-licking dish for only 2 francs. Madame Gaudron bitterly complained that she had been shoved down to the worst end of the table next to My Boots, who had ignored her. These parties never turned out well. One should be more careful whom one invites. Gervaise had taken refuge with Mother Coupeau near one of the windows, feeling shamed as she realized that all these recriminations would fall back upon her. Monsieur Madinier ended by going down with the landlord. One could hear them arguing below. Then, when half an hour had gone by, the cardboard box manufacturer returned. He had settled the matter by giving 3 francs, but the party continued annoyed and exasperated, constantly returning to the question of the extras. And the uproar increased from an act of vigor on Madame Boche's part. She had kept an eye on Boche, and at length detected him squeezing Madame Lerat round the waist in a corner. Then, with all her strength, she flung a water pitcher, which smashed against the wall. "One can easily see that your husband's a tailor, madame," said the tall widow, with a curl of the lip, full of a double meaning. "He's a petticoat specialist, even though I gave him some pretty hard kicks under the table." The harmony of the evening was altogether upset. Everyone became more and more ill-tempered. Monsieur Madinier suggested some singing, but Bibi the smoker, who had a fine voice, had disappeared some time before, and Mademoiselle Remanjou, who was leaning out of the window, caught sight of him under the acacias, swinging round a big girl who was bareheaded. The cornet à piston and 2 fiddles were playing Le Marchand de Moutarde. The party now began to break up. My Boots and the Gaudron went down to the dance, with Boche sneaking along after them. The twirling couples could be seen from the windows. The night was still as though exhausted from the heat of the day. A serious conversation started between Lorilleux and Monsieur Madinier. The ladies examined their dresses carefully to see if they'd been stained. Madame Lerat's fringe looked as though it had been dipped in the coffee. Madame Fauconnier's chintz dress was spotted with gravy. Mother Coupeau's green shawl, fallen from off a chair, was discovered in a corner, rolled up and trodden upon. But it was Madame Lorilleux especially who became more ill-tempered still. She had a stain on the back of her dress. It was useless for the others to declare that she had not. She felt it. And by twisting herself about in front of a looking-glass, she ended by catching a glimpse of it. "What did I say?" cried she. "It's gravy from the fowl. The waiter shall pay for the dress. I will bring an action against him. Ah, this is a fit ending to such a day. I should have done better to have stayed in bed. To begin with, I'm off. I've had enough of their wretched wedding." And she left the room in a rage, causing the staircase to shake beneath her heavy footsteps. Lorilleux ran after her. But all she would consent to was that she would wait 5 minutes on the pavement outside if he wanted them to go off together. She ought to have left directly after the storm, as she wished to do. She would make Coupeau sorry for that day. Coupeau was dismayed when he heard how angry she was. Gervaise agreed to leave at once to avoid embarrassing him any more. There was a flurry of quick good-night kisses. Monsieur Madinier was to escort Mother Coupeau home. Madame Boche would take Claude and Etienne with her for the bridal night. The children were sound asleep on chairs, stuffed full from the dinner. Just as the bridal couple and Lorilleux were about to go out the door, a quarrel broke out near the dance floor between their group and another group. Boche and My Boots were kissing a lady and wouldn't give her up to her escorts, 2 soldiers. It was scarcely 11 o'clock. On the Boulevard de la Chapelle, and in the entire neighborhood of the Goutte d'Or, the fortnight's pay, which fell due on that Saturday, produced an enormous drunken uproar. Madame Lorilleux was waiting beneath a gas lamp about 20 paces from the silver windmill. She took her husband's arm and walked on in front without looking round, at such a rate that Gervaise and Coupeau got quite out of breath in trying to keep up with them. Now and again they stepped off the pavement to leave room for some drunkard who had fallen there. Lorilleux looked back, endeavouring to make things pleasant. "We will see you as far as your door," said he. But Madame Lorilleux, raising her voice, thought it a funny thing to spend one's wedding night in such a filthy hole as the Hôtel Boncoeur. Ought they not to have put their marriage off, and have saved a few sous to buy some furniture, so to have had a home of their own on the first night? Ah, they would be comfortable right up under the roof, packed into a little closet at 10 francs a month, where there was not even the slightest air. "I've given notice we're not going to use the room at the top of the house," timidly interposed Coupeau. "We're keeping Gervaise's room, which is larger." Madame Lorilleux forgot herself. She turned abruptly round. "That's worse than all," cried she. "You're going to sleep in Clump's room." Gervaise became quite pale. This nickname, which she received full in the face for the first time, fell on her like a blow. And she fully understood it too, her sister-in-law's exclamation. The Clump's room was the room in which she had lived for a month with Lantier, where the shreds of her past life still hung about. Coupeau did not understand this, but merely felt hurt at the harsh nickname. "You do wrong to christen others," he replied angrily. "You don't know, perhaps, that in the neighborhood they call you Cow's Tail because of your hair. There, that doesn't please you, does it? Why should we not keep the room on the first floor? Tonight the children won't sleep there, and we shall be very comfortable." Madame Lorilleux added nothing further, but retired into her dignity, horribly annoyed at being called Cow's Tail. To cheer up Gervaise, Coupeau squeezed her arm softly. He even succeeded in making her smile by whispering into her ear that they were setting up housekeeping with the grand sum of 7 sous, 3 big 2-sou pieces and 1 little sou, which he jingled in his pocket. When they reached the Hôtel Boncoeur, the 2 couples wished each other good night with an angry air, and as Coupeau pushed the 2 women into each other's arms, calling them a couple of ninnies, a drunken fellow, who seemed to want to go to the right, suddenly slipped to the left and came tumbling between them. "Why, it's old Bazouge," said Lorilleux. "He's had his fill today." Gervaise, frightened, squeezed up against the door of the hotel. Old Bazouge, an undertaker's helper of some 50 years of age, had his black trousers all stained with mud, his black cape hooked onto his shoulder, and his black feather hat knocked in by some tumble he had taken. "Don't be afraid, he's harmless," continued Lorilleux. "He's a neighbor of ours, the third room in the passage before us. He would find himself in a nice mess if his people were to see him like this." Old Bazouge, however, felt offended at the young woman's evident terror. "Well, what?" hiccuped he. "We ain't going to eat anyone. I'm as good as another any day, my little woman. No doubt I've had a drop. When work's plentiful, one must grease the wheels. It's not you nor your friends who would have carried down the stiff 'un of 47 stone whom I and a pal brought from the 4th floor to the pavement, and without smashing him too. I like jolly people." But Gervaise retreated further into the doorway, seized with a longing to cry, which spoilt her day of sober-minded joy. She no longer thought of kissing her sister-in-law. She implored Coupeau to get rid of the drunkard. Then Bazouge, as he stumbled about, made a gesture of philosophical disdain. "That won't prevent you passing through our hands, my little woman. You'll perhaps be glad to do so one of these days. Yes, I know some women who'd be much obliged if we did carry 'em off." And as Lorilleux led him away, he turned around and stuttered out a last sentence between two hiccups. "When you're dead, listen to this, when you're dead, it's for a long, long time." End of chapter 3. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.